The first drops of morning rain leaked through the cracks in the old tin roof, landing in small pots Aliyah had placed across the floor. The sound of drip, drip, drip was more familiar to her than any alarm clock. She opened her tired eyes and sat up on the thin mattress, stretching her aching back. Around her, the one-room house was quiet except for her mother's weak cough from the corner. Aliyah tied a faded scarf over her head and walked to the small clay stove. With quick, practiced hands, she began rolling out flatbread for breakfast. The smoke from the cheap wood stung her eyes, but she ignored it. "Daughter," her mother's fragile voice called from the corner, "is the tea ready?" "Almost, Mama," Aliyah replied softly, pouring the steaming liquid into a chipped cup. "I have to leave early today."
Madame Zara warned me yesterday. If I'm late again, she won't let me inside.
Her mother frowned with worry. "Don't spend money on snacks outside."
Therese left over lentils from last night.
Aliyah smiled gently.
Don't worry.
"I'll manage. And I'll bring your medicine today too." She said it with confidence, though she wasn't sure if she could afford it. Medicines cost money, and money was always short. The narrow streets outside were muddy and crowded. Children played barefoot, men shouted at each other over prices, and women carried heavy buckets of water on their heads. Aliyah slipped past them quietly, carrying her own small bag of cleaning supplies. She had no time to wait in the endless line for the water tanker.
Work came first.
Her first stop was the tall, glass-walled apartment building where Madame Zara lived. The marble lobby gleamed, smelling of expensive perfume. The security guard at the entrance barely looked at her but still asked, "ID card?" Aliyah handed over her laminated Maid pass. "Flat 11B, cleaning duty," she said politely. The guard stared at it for a second longer than necessary, as if doubting its authenticity. Then he waved her through. When Aliyah entered
the apartment, Madame Zara was already annoyed. A few drops of water had been left on the marble countertop. "Do you people understand anything?" she snapped. "I told you yesterday. No watermarks on the counters. Clients are visiting today. Everything must be perfect." Aliyah lowered her head respectfully. "I'm sorry, madam. I'll fix it right away." She worked silently, polishing the counter until it shone. Inside, her heart burned. In her home, nothing was perfect. The roof leaked, the walls cracked, the food was never enough. But here, in someone else's house, she was expected to deliver perfection every day. Her second job of the morning was kinder. A young couple, Amir and Hina, both professionals, treated her with small kindnesses. Sometimes Hina gave her leftover bread, sometimes just a smile. "Aliyah, have you ever thought about continuing your studies?" Hina asked once as she poured her a glass of water. Aliyah hesitated. "I had to drop out after high school. The fees were too much. But sometimes at night, I try to learn from YouTube. English, basic accounting, small things like that." Hina's eyes lit up. "That's good. Keep learning. Accounting, Excel, communication, it will help you." That night, Aliyah scribbled into her worn-out diary. Learn Excel. It felt impossible, but so did everything in her life until she forced herself to do it. Her third house was the hardest. An elderly woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. "How old are you now?" The woman barked for the 10th time. "Still not married? Who will feed you when you're old? You think scrubbing floors will give you respect?" Aliyah smiled faintly and said nothing. Respect never came from others anyway. At least she could give some to herself. By evening, Aliyah's legs throbbed, her hands raw from harsh detergents. She and a group of other maids waited at the bus stop, their buckets and cloths rattling together as the bus jerked to a stop point. One of them, Sumble, laughed. "Tomorrow is Sunday. Let's sit by the river FO. Fresh air. It's free." Aliyah chuckled tiredly. "And so are the mosquitoes. But fine, why not?" Even in poverty, laughter was sometimes the only survival skill they had. On her way home, Aliyah passed a roadside bookstall. Old, secondhand books stacked under a plastic sheet. Titles like Business Basics, How to Talk to Anyone, Excel for Beginners. One caught her eye. Excel for Beginners. "How much?" she asked. $3.50, the shopkeeper said. Aliyah checked her purse. Only 200 left. Her heart sank. She needed milk and medicine, not books. But her fingers lingered on the cover, tracing the faded letters. "Please, keep this aside for me," she said softly. "I'll bring the rest tomorrow." The shopkeeper sighed but nodded. "All right, but don't forget, this is the last copy." Aliyah walked away with mixed feelings. guilt for not buying milk, but hope for something bigger. Excel for beginners. Maybe, just maybe, this was her first step. That night, after dinner, after giving her mother half a dose of medicine they could afford, Aliyah stood in the tiny balcony of their cramped home. From there, she could see the city skyline glowing with lights. Behind those lights were hotels, offices, towers filled with people who never worried about tomorrow's rent or unpaid bills. She whispered to herself, "Do they even know what fear feels like? Fear of running out, fear of not belonging, fear of never becoming anything." Then she shook her head. Fear would not define her. She picked up her old diary, wrote 3 new goals. 1. Pay balance for Excel book. Point 2. Practice speaking confidently. Point 3. Save at least $300 this week. The bottom. She wrote in bold letters, "One day my own office." And next to it, she drew a tiny check mark, as if to promise herself it would one day be completed. Lying down on her thin mattress, listening again to the drip, drip, drip from the leaking roof, Aliyah closed her eyes. Poverty was her present. Insults were her routine. But inside her, something had already shifted. A light had been lit, small but unshakable. She whispered to herself before sleep claimed her, "I may be a maid today, but this is just the first chapter of my story." Graduation day should have been a celebration. Aliyah still remembered walking across the stage in her borrowed gown, her mother and little brother cheering from the back of the auditorium. For a moment, she thought life was finally opening its doors. She imagined walking into banks with her degree, investors shaking her hand, opportunities flowing like the bright sunlight through those tall auditorium windows. But reality hit her faster than she could prepare. The first bank she walked into had marble floors and polished counters. She held her carefully written business plan in her hands, her palms sweating with both nerves and hope. "Sir, I want to apply for a small business loan," she explained to the loan officer, sliding the neatly typed documents across the desk. The officer, a man in his 40s with sharp glasses, barely skimmed the pages. "Miss Johnson, is it? You want to start a hotel?" He raised an eyebrow. "Yes," Aliyah said firmly. "I've done the research. I know the risks. I also know the opportunities." He chuckled under his breath. "Hotels require millions in capital. Do you have collateral? Land? Property?" Aliyah shook her head. "No, but I have experience working in hotels. I have a savings plan, and The man cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Without collateral, there's nothing we can do. Be realistic. Hotels are not for people like you." The words pierced her like knives. She left the office with her head bowed, the sting of humiliation heavier than the weight of her documents. Bank after bank gave the same answer. Some were polite, others blunt. A few even laughed. At one place, the officer leaned back in his chair and said with a smirk, "Young lady, even if we gave you the loan, do you really think guests would trust you to run a hotel? You don't have the image for it." Aliyah's hands trembled as she gathered her papers. She wanted to scream, to shout that she was more than her skin, more than her background. But she stayed silent, swallowing the pain. The rejection followed her everywhere. When she applied for jobs in established hotels, hoping at least to gain managerial experience, the interviews often ended with the same thin smile and empty words, "We'll call you." They never did. One manager looked her up and down before saying, "We're looking for someone who represents our brand better." You understand, right? Aliyah did understand. She understood that no matter how hard she studied, no matter how much experience she gathered, people would see only her poverty, her background, her skin. Even her friends failed to believe in her. One evening, sitting with a small group from the neighborhood, she tried to share her plans. "I've been saving. I'm learning Excel. One day, I'll open my own hotel." The group burst out laughing. "Are you serious?" One of them mocked. "You don't even own a proper pair of shoes. And you think you'll own a hotel?" Another shook her head. "Aliyah, dream smaller. Life is easier when you don't expect too much." Keisha, her childhood friend, sighed. "I love you, but you're wasting your time. A hotel? For you? Be realistic." Aliyah forced a smile, but her chest ached. She wanted to scream, "Why not me? Why not someone like us?" But instead, she just sat silently, her hands clenched under the table. Tea night. The weight of their words crushed her. She lay on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, tears blurring her vision. Maybe they're right, she whispered. Maybe I'm chasing something impossible. But then she remembered the child she used to be, the girl who stood across the street staring at hotels, whispering, "One day, I'll own one." That memory pulled her back from the edge of despair. The insults continued in her daily life. At the wealthy houses where she worked, some employers treated her like invisible furniture. They threw their shoes at her to clean, left their plates on the floor for her to pick up. One woman, notorious for her sharp tongue, once said loudly in front of her friends, "These people are born to serve. Do you really think they can ever rise above?" The group laughed while Aliyah stood in silence, her face burning. She wanted to vanish, but instead she bowed and picked up the empty teacups. Inside, her soul screamed, but with every insult, a strange thing happened. Instead of breaking, she hardened. Every no became fuel. Every mocking laugh became a challenge. She began to carry a secret fire inside her chest. One evening, after yet another rejection, Aliyah walked home under the dim streetlights. She stopped at a cracked wall where someone had scribbled in chalk, "Never let them tell you what you cannot do." She traced the words with her finger, whispering, "They can laugh. They can reject me, but they cannot stop me." At home, her mother noticed her silent tears. "Maya," Angela said softly, for her family sometimes called her by her middle name, "don't let their words break you. They don't know your heart." Aliyah shook her head. "But Mama, what if they're right? What if I really can't do it?" Her mother took her hands firmly. "Then fail. Fail 100 times. But don't stop trying. Because if you stop, their words win. And I refuse to raise a daughter who lets the world decide her worth." Those words planted themselves deep inside Aliyah's soul. By the end of that year, Aliyah was no closer to owning a hotel. She was still cleaning, still scrubbing, still invisible to most of the world. But she was different. Each insult had carved her into something sharper, stronger. She kept saving. She kept studying. She kept whispering to herself every night, "This is not where my story ends." And though the world didn't know it yet, Aliyah Johnson was not breaking. She was becoming unbreakable. The endless cycle of work, rejection, and humiliation had almost turned Aliyah numb. Days bled into nights, nights into weeks. She cleaned, she scrubbed, she served, all the while saving coins in a small tin box under her mattress. Yet some days she couldn't help but feel she was running on a treadmill, moving endlessly but going nowhere. But sometimes destiny doesn't shout. It whispers. One evening, Aliyah was cleaning the lobby of a small boutique hotel where she had recently taken an extra shift. She usually kept her eyes down, invisible to guests, but that night, something caught her attention. A group of business executives had gathered in the lounge, sipping coffee and talking loudly about investments. "The hospitality industry is booming," one of them said. "Even failing hotels can be turned around if you know how to run them. Buy them cheap, renovate, rebrand, then sell for double." Aliyah froze, her mop midair. "Failing hotels, turn around." The words echoed in her head. She moved closer, pretending to polish a table, straining to catch every word. "It's not about luxury," another man added. "It's about vision. If you can see potential where others see failure, you win." Something lit up inside her. For years, she had imagined marble floors, chandeliers, grand lobbies. But what if her dream didn't have to start that big? What if it could begin with something small, broken, forgotten? That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. Buy them cheap. See potential. Turn them around. It was like the universe had handed her a clue, a key she hadn't considered before. The next morning, while flipping through a stack of discarded newspapers, her eyes caught a small advertisement. "For sale. Old Riverside Inn. 30 rooms. Poor condition. Price negotiable." Her heart raced. She tore out the ad and folded it carefully into her diary. The spark was alive now, burning hotter each day. She began to study differently. Instead of just dreaming of grand hotels, she researched case studies of failing inns that became success few. She read about entrepreneurs who started small, flipping broken properties into gold. Every night after work, She sat in her tiny balcony, watching the city lights, reading by the glow of her phone screen. Her diary filled with scribbles. Location matters more than luxury. Customer service can save even a weak property. Rebranding is key. Her savings tin under the mattress grew heavier. The sound of coins clinking inside was like music to her ears. One day, while cleaning at Madame Zara's house, Aliyah overheard her on the phone. Yes, we're investing in that new hotel chain. Hospitality is where the money is. Once you own property, people respect you differently. Respect. That word stung like fire. That evening, Aliyah stared at herself in the cracked mirror of her home. Her clothes were plain, her hands rough with calluses, her eyes tired. People like Madame Zara, the banks, her neighbors, they all thought she was invisible, unworthy of respect. But what if one day she walked into a room, not with a mop in her hand, but with ownership papers? What if she became the kind of woman people had no choice but to respect? She whispered to her reflection. One day, they'll have to look up to me. Her mother noticed the fire in her eyes again. Aliyah, she said one night, worried, why do you look at those hotel ads with such hunger? We can barely pay rent. Don't let impossible dreams break you. But Aliyah shook her head firmly. Manga, listen. All my life, I thought I had to wait for the perfect chance for someone to believe in me. But what if I just start with something broken, something nobody else wants? I don't need perfect. I just need possible. Angela sighed, her heart torn between fear and pride. Then promise me one thing, daughter. Whatever happens, don't let this dream destroy you. I promise. Aliyah whispered, but inside, she knew this dream was the only thing keeping her alive. The insults didn't stop, of course. People still mocked her. One coworker laughed when she saw Aliyah collecting hotel brochures from the trash. Why are you wasting time? Do you think you'll own one of these someday? She sneered. Aliyah didn't reply. She simply smiled and folded the brochure into her bag. Inside, her fire burned hotter. Weeks turned into months, and her savings grew slowly. Every coin she dropped into the tin box felt like fuel for the flame. She started saying no to small pleasures. No snacks, no new clothes, no outings. Every rupee, every dollar was sacred. Sometimes she imagined the sound of coins wasn't just money. It was bricks being laid, walls being built, doors opening into her future hotel. The turning point came unexpectedly. One late evening. After a long shift, Aliyah walked past the Riverside Inn, the very property from the newspaper ad. It was worse than she imagined. The signboard was broken, paint peeling, windows cracked. Guests avoided it. Locals whispered that it was cursed. But when Aliyah stood before it, she didn't see decay. She saw opportunity. She saw lights glowing in the windows, guests laughing in the lobby, staff moving with pride. She saw herself behind the reception desk, not as a cleaner, but as the owner. Her heart pounded. She reached out and touched the old wooden door, whispering, "One day, you'll be mine." From that night, the Riverside Inn became her obsession. She walked past it every week, studying its location, watching how few guests came and went, imagining ways to bring it back to life. Her diary filled with ideas. Paint walls bright. Offer free breakfast. Friendly staff training. Social media 8ds.it wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a plan. For the first time, Aliyah felt something shift deep inside her. The insults, the rejections, the humiliations, they no longer crushed her. Instead, they became proof of how much she needed to rise. Her spark had turned into a fire, and soon, that fire would push her to make the boldest decision of her life. Once the spark was lit, Aliyah could no longer live her days the same way. The Riverside Inn had become more than just an old building on a forgotten street. It had become a symbol, and to reach it, she knew she had to push herself harder than ever before. Her schedule, already brutal, became almost impossible. In the mornings, she worked as a maid in apartments, scrubbing floors, polishing counters, and carrying laundry up endless stairs. By afternoon, she switched uniforms and became a receptionist at a small motel. At night, she picked up shifts at a catering service, carrying trays of food at weddings and corporate parties. Sometimes she didn't return home until dawn, collapsing on her thin mattress for 2 or 3 hours before the cycle began again. Her mother begged her to slow down. "You'll destroy yourself," Angela said one night as Aliyah returned with swollen feet, her hands blistered from harsh detergents. Aliyah shook her head, her voice hoarse but steady. For the first time, Aliyah felt something shift deep inside her. The insults, the rejections, the humiliations, they no longer crushed her. Instead, they became proof of how much she needed to rise. Her spark had turned into a fire, and soon, that fire would push her to make the boldest decision of her life. Once the spark was lit, Aliyah could no longer live her days the same way. The Riverside Inn had become more than just an old building on a forgotten street. It had become a symbol. And to reach it, she knew she had to push herself harder than ever before. Her schedule, already brutal, became almost impossible. In the mornings, she worked as a maid in apartments, scrubbing floors, polishing counters, and carrying laundry up endless stairs. By afternoon, she switched uniforms and became a receptionist at a small motel. At night, she picked up shifts at a catering service, carrying trays of food at weddings and corporate parties. Sometimes she didn't return home until dawn, collapsing onto her thin mattress for 2 or 3 hours before the cycle began again. Her mother begged her to slow down. "You'll destroy yourself," Angela said one night as Aliyah returned with swollen feet, her hands blistered from harsh detergents. Aliyah shook her head, her voice hoarse but steady. The keys were sticky, the screen cracked, but she didn't care. Row by row, column by column, she taught herself spreadsheets, budgets, and formulas. It was slow, frustrating work. Sometimes the laptop froze, sometimes the power went out, but Aliyah refused to stop. She knew these skills weren't just numbers. They were weapons that in her diary, she scribbled late into the night. Learn accounting. Learn marketing. Learn leadership. If no one will teach me, I will teach myself. At the catering jobs, she observed how wealthy guests carried themselves, their conversations, their confidence. She listened to their business talk, memorizing terms she didn't fully understand, then searched for them online later. Assets, liabilities, return on investment. Slowly, the language of business stopped feeling foreign, but the sacrifices cut deep. Her little brother complained, "You're never home, Dee," carrying laundry up endless stairs. By afternoon, she switched uniforms and became a receptionist at a small motel. At night, she picked up shifts at a catering service, carrying trays of food at weddings and corporate parties. Sometimes she didn't return home until dawn, collapsing onto her thin mattress for 2 or 3 hours before the cycle began again. Her mother begged her to slow down. "You'll destroy yourself," Angela said one night as Aliyah returned with swollen feet, her hands blistered from harsh detergents. Aliyah show.
Her head, her voice hoarse but steady. The keys were sticky, the screen cracked, but she didn't care. Row by row, column by column, she taught herself spreadsheets, budgets, and formulas. It was slow, frustrating work. Sometimes the laptop froze, sometimes the power went out, but Aliyah refused to stop. She knew these skills weren't just numbers. They were weapons. In her diary, she scribbled late into the night, "Learn accounting, learn marketing, learn leadership. If no one will teach me, I will teach myself. The catering jobs. She observed how wealthy guests carried themselves, their conversations, their confidence. She listened to their business talk, memorizing terms she didn't fully understand, then searched for them online later. Assets, liabilities, return on investment. Slowly, the language of business stopped feeling foreign, but the sacrifices cut deep. Her little brother complained, "You're never home, Dee," then turned into a small bank account. It was still a tiny drop compared to what she needed, but it was progress. Every time she deposited money, the bank teller looked at her oddly, like she was crazy for saving so religiously on such small earnings. "Why save so much?" the teller asked once. Half joking, Aliyah smiled. "Because one day, I'll need it to buy my dream." The teller laughed politely, assuming she meant a scooter or a small shop. Aliyah didn't bother correcting her, but sacrifice wasn't only about money. It was about dignity today to the motel reception job. One night a drunk guest slammed his card on the counter and sneered, "Girls like you should be cleaning my room, not sitting behind this desk." Aaliyah's cheeks burned, but she forced a professional smile. "Sir, I'm here to help you check in." Later, in the bathroom, she stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She whispered, "One day, no one will dare talk to me like this. One day, they'll call me madam." The sacrifices began to pay off in small ways. Her Excel skills helped her manage the motel's records more efficiently, catching the attention of the owner. "You're smart," he admitted one day. "Have you ever thought about running your own place?" Aaliyah's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Yes, every single day." The owner laughed, thinking it was a joke. But Aaliyah wasn't joking. Her fire grew hotter. She made lists of every cost she would face as she ever bought the Riverside in: repairs, staff salaries, electricity, marketing. She calculated budgets again and again until she could recite them in her sleep. She read online about entrepreneurs who started with nothing. She repeated their words to herself like prayers. Success is not for the chosen few. It's for the few who choose it. Her sacrifices didn't just prepare her financially. They prepared her mentally. Every insult toughened her skin. Every sleepless night built her endurance. Every rejection sharpened her focus. She was no longer just Aaliyah the maid, Aaliyah the cleaner, Aaliyah the receptionist. She was Aaliyah the fighter. And one day soon, she would be Aaliyah the owner. The day Aaliyah stood outside the Riverside and with the keys in her trembling hands, she felt like the world had finally shifted. The faded signboard above her head still read Riverside in half-broken letters, but to her, it looked like a crown. She pressed the cold metal keys to her chest and whispered, "This is it. After all the years of sweat and sacrifice, this is my beginning." The journey to this moment had not been easy. It took nearly 10 years of endless saving, humiliations, and small victories. But when the opportunity came, Aaliyah didn't hesitate. The Riverside Inn had been on sale for months. Investors dismissed it as worthless. The paint was peeling. The room smelled damp. The lobby lights flickered like dying candles. Guests avoided it. Locals called it cursed. But Aaliyah didn't see a ruin. She saw potential. When the real estate agent warned her, "Miss Johnson, this property will eat your money alive," Aaliyah smiled. "Then I'll feed it until it grows strong." The final negotiations drained every coin she had. She pooled her savings, begged for a small community loan, and signed the ownership papers with hands that shook from both fear and pride. Her first night inside the hotel as its owner was surreal. She walked through the empty corridors, her footsteps echoing against cracked tiles. The reception desk was dusty, the couches torn, but she ran her fingers across them lovingly. "This is mine," she whispered. "It may be broken, but it's mine." The euphoria didn't last long. The very next morning, she gathered the small team of staff who had remained from the previous management. Instead of excitement, she saw doubt in their eyes. "She's too young," one muttered under his breath. "She doesn't know this business," another scoffed. During the meeting, when Aaliyah outlined her plans, cleaning schedules, customer service training, marketing ideas, the staff exchanged skeptical looks. Some even smirked. One older employee crossed his arms. "With respect, miss, this place has been dying for years. You can't save it. Why waste your time?" Aaliyah straightened her shoulders. "Because I don't believe in giving up. Not on this place. Not on myself." A few days later, half the staff quit. Running the hotel with a skeleton crew was chaos. Aaliyah became everything the business needed: manager, cleaner, receptionist, plumber, marketer. She scrubbed bathrooms, fixed broken light fixtures, checked in guests, and balanced the accounts late into the night. The first few weeks nearly broke her. Bills piled up faster than bookings. Some nights, only 1 or 2 rooms were occupied. On others, none at all. The electricity company threatened disconnection. The loan officer reminded her of deadlines. One night, exhausted and close to tears, she sat in the dark lobby with her head in her hands. The emptiness of the building mocked her. "What if they were right?" she whispered. "What if I was foolish to think I could do this?" But then she remembered her mother's words. Fail 100 times, but don't stop trying. Wiping her tears, she stood up, grabbed a bucket and mop, and started cleaning the lobby floor until it gleamed. If nothing else, she thought, this place would shine. Guests weren't kind at first. This place is terrible. One man barked at the reception. The water is cold. The sheets are stained. I want a refund. I'm so sorry, sir, Aaliyah said with a calm smile, though her heart pounded. Please give me one more chance. Tonight, I'll move you to our best room, free of charge. And tomorrow, I'll personally serve you a fresh breakfast. The guest rolled his eyes, but the next morning, when Aaliyah kept her promise, he softened. As he checked out, he muttered, At least you're trying. Good luck. That single crumb of encouragement felt like gold. And then, one morning, as she scrolled through the hotel's online reviews, she saw it. The Riverside Inn is improving. The new owner is young but hardworking. The service feels personal. I'll come back. Her hands trembled as she read it again and again. Tears blurred her vision, but this time they weren't from despair. They were from hope. Her mother, visiting for the first time, walked into the lobby and gasped. It's still old, but it feels alive. You've given it life. Breakthrough came during the city's annual cultural festival. Hotels across town filled up, and for the first time, Riverside Inn was overbooked. Aaliyah worked 48 hours straight, checking in guests, managing complaints, serving meals, cleaning rooms when staff couldn't keep up. When the festival ended, the numbers spoke for themselves. The revenue from that 1 week was enough to cover overdue bills and give a breathing space. For the first time, Aaliyah allowed herself to exhale deeply. For the first time, she believed not only in her dream, but in her ability to achieve it. That night, she stood outside the hotel, looking up at the broken signboard. The letters were still faded, but in her mind, she already saw them glowing bright. This is only the beginning, she whispered. Her first breakthrough had come, not because the world finally believed in her, but because she refused to stop believing in herself. 2 years after buying the Riverside Inn, Aaliyah stood in the same lobby where she had once cried in exhaustion, begging the walls not to collapse on her dreams. Now, the lobby sparkled with fresh paint, elegant lighting, and the soft aroma of flowers. Guests chatted happily at the reception. Staff moved with confidence, and the once broken building pulsed with life. But for Aaliyah, this was only the beginning. With the profits carefully reinvested, she started scouting for other failing properties. She remembered the businessman's words that had once ignited a spark. If you can see potential where others see failure, you win. She bought a small motel near the train station, then another near the airport. Each property was broken. Each came with doubters who said, it's impossible. And each time, Aaliyah proved them wrong. Within 5 years, she owned a chain of boutique hotels across the city. Locals called her the woman who turned ruins into gold. Newspapers ran headlines, From Maid to Millionaire, the unstoppable rise of Aaliyah Johnson. Her name spread beyond the city. She was invited to conferences to speak about resilience and entrepreneurship. At first, she was nervous, remembering the days when her voice shook even in job interviews. But as she stood before hundreds of aspiring entrepreneurs, she told her story with raw honesty. They laughed at me, she said, her voice steady. They told me I didn't belong. They told me to dream smaller. But every insult became fuel, every rejection became a lesson. And today, I stand before you as proof that your circumstances don't define your destiny.